I'm trying to decide whether to go fly or build, but having just checked the weather, I think it's going to be a build day. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Skippy and welcome to another video. So we're on to part 3 of the Guillow's P47 Thunderbolt build. Part 1 of the introduction, you've seen that or not seen it yet. It's where I built the tail surfaces using the aura cover with the nice aluminium foil. Part 2 went onto the main wing with the ailerons, removable undercarriage, still need to paint those bits, and the wing itself. I covered where I made a few mistakes and added in some extra stringers to hopefully strengthen it. So now we're going to move on to the fuselage build. So usual Guillow's plan, start off building with the keel parts, add on the formers, do the two halves together, and then add on all the stringers. So I shall be using the plan. Obviously we're doing an electric conversion, so need to put the electronics and the battery somewhere. What I like to do is try and have the battery as far forward as possible for the nose weight. And here, looking at this, it probably makes more sense to put the hatch in this section between these ribs. So what I'll be doing is, as I build up the fuselage, I'll probably duplicate these formers, cut across here, and then build a hatch that sits nicely onto the ribs. When you look at the plan here, I won't do it that deep, or I might do it that deep. I'll wait and see once I put it on there. If not, I might raise it another stringer up, which is what I've done in the past, and I think I did for the FW190 as well. That'll give plenty of space for the battery, and the motor will go on the front here. I'll then, before I put all the stringers on, I'll make sure that the receiver is put in place under the canopy just so that I can see it. Obviously the servos for the tail sections will go back here. I'll try and have them a little bit further forward, preferably over the wing, just for the better CFG, and we'll see how it goes. So let's get on with the build. Just as a reminder, this is a pressed kit, so not laser cut, so the components aren't nicely ready to pop out. So what I'll do, or what I did previously for the ribs, is lightly sand on the back side, and as you can see then the cut actually starts to come through, and on this one, if you sand it hard enough, it will actually pop out the piece. So it saves a lot of time trying to cut out all of these. Obviously you'll need to do it just to make sure it's nice and neat. So I'll start by sanding the backs of all the sheets here to get all the relevant parts out for the fuselage build. Here we have all the components for the fuselage. There's a couple of extras that came with the kit. For the main part, most of them came out no problems at all. Sanding definitely helps. What I do find though is with the pressed kits, it's very difficult to see the lines sometimes. So I wasn't sure if I was cutting on the right place or not. But generally they seem to have come out okay. So obviously I now need to sand them down and also cut out all the slots for the stringers on the main formers themselves. And while I was doing it, I cut out all the other parts. So now I just have a pile of balsa in the scrap bin, and I can get on with sanding and then left in the kit miscellaneous bits of balsa that I'm sure I'll use as I go along. Well, after 40 minutes of cutting and sanding, and cutting and more cutting and sanding, finally finished sorting out all the components for the fuselage. So I'll call that quits for today and I'll get on with the rest tomorrow. So we're just going to start by pinning the components onto the plan on top of the greaseproof paper. You can see we're just going to follow it all the way through. Also doing the spars that will go down the center of the ribs, and we'll start putting the formers in, using the angle, right angle, to make sure that they're straight, so you get the idea. So we'll skip through all of these now, keeping them as straight as possible as we go. Always the easier side. Put in the support, removed it from the paper, all looks good, nice and straight. Starting with the end former now. These is always harder, I can't use the right angles. Skipped here, tried to get as many of them straight. You can see there's a couple that aren't so straight there, so I need to fix those. But other than that, it looks pretty good. Okay, so these are all the fuselage formers in place. I haven't bored you with the photos, you get the gist of it. But they're all pretty good now. B6 it was, I think, wasn't very straight, so I had to split it and re-straighten it. But they're all looking a lot better. As I said in the previous video when I did the wing, need to shape the leading edge to make sure it fits the fuselage better. And what I've always struggled is to get that angle on the wing. But this time, a top tip, if you cut a groove, focus on it, cut a groove where, there it is, sorry, cut a groove where the central rib is and where the actual main spar goes, the A4 piece, you'll find it, rather than having to sand the whole rib to get it to fit, and often I don't get a very good fit at all, actually what I've found is cutting that notch into the leading edge means I've got the right thickness of leading edge so it fits snug against the former there, and then with that slot it fits this piece nicely. So I'll stop videoing, put it in place and then show you. Right, so there you can see the gap between the spine, as it were, of the fuselage and the central rib is pretty darn good, and you can see how it slots into leading edge. Nice space or nice tightness there, but not too tight, which means when I put the cover on, it's going to still fit, although I'm not sure whether I'll actually need to cover the central part of this wing, but we shall see. So yeah, top tip, put a slot into your leading edge, then that fits in really nicely, giving you a nice small gap, which obviously when I push some or put some pressure on with glue, that'll seat up nicely. So with the fuselage basic shape built, then I now need to work out where the electrics go. So I'm anticipating the rear servos will go in about there, the receiver will go central there, and obviously the battery and motor will go on the front. As I said, I'm going to make a battery hatch between these two formers, but first I'll just make sure that I will do the battery hatch first, and then I'll look at putting the motor mount on, and then base for the receiver, and then the rear servos, and then I can look at putting the tail section on. What I'm doing now is just putting in the L1 pieces, which will give a little bit of support from the fuselage onto the top of the wing. Right then, battery compartment. What I normally do is build the battery compartment between the front three formers. So I would cut this one out, the spar there, and then create a hatch. But because the Thunderbolt is so deep, whichever battery I use fits easily in that first compartment. So actually having the weight at the front makes more sense. So I'm not going to actually do a compartment across the two sections. I'll just do it at the front here. So to do that, obviously we need to make the template. So I've photocopied the formers, and then here's one I prepared earlier. I then fold the page in half down the center line so that I then have full size shape. I'll then cut this in half because obviously I only want the top hatch, so I'll do it from the center to start with. It will go down here, a nice deep hatch, and then cut that onto balsa strip, and we'll see how it looks. So here we have the cutouts for parts B1 and B2. Fold them in half because obviously the side isn't accurate. Trimmed it down, as I said, for the piece that I actually need. Once you unfold it, you can then use that as the template on the balsa. I've cut the center slot in there, and as you can see, it fits nicely. Removed the original piece of wood, made sure I kept it in line. Now creating the actual new formers, making sure it fits nicely. Both fit in, sanded it down a little bit as well. A nice snug fit. It will get a bit looser as I sand it. Use some greaseproof paper to glue in the bottoms of the battery hatch, where I'll need also to put some magnets in at a later date. All nicely fits. Now cut in the notches for the stringers, glue those in place, and then I just need to trim them down like that. Give it a nice sand, make sure it's all smooth ended, all fits in nice and neat, doesn't look too bad. Put it in the aluminium foil. I think it could look better though. Quite pleased with how the battery hatch has come out. It's obviously covered in the aluminium foil, this stuff, although it does seem a little bit flat in places. So I'm thinking actually, while I've got the opportunity, I might remove this and then try and cover it with Aura cover and see what difference that makes. I'm sure as I start to build, well, as I've built up the fuselage and then start to cover it, there might be places where having the aluminium foil is easier to apply than the Aura cover, which needs to be ironed on. So I'm just going to remove this foil and then see how that looks. Well, the reassuring thing about that little exercise is that the foil can be taken off, but it can be a bit of a faff, especially on the edge there where I'd slit it to go around the curves. But it's done, so we'll see. Okay, so this is the battery hatch with the aura cover, and I think you'll probably agree that that does look actually a lot better. It's a lot neater. Managed to shrink it nicely. I shrank it in place just in case because I wasn't sure how much it would tighten and warp, but it seems to have taken really well, so I'm very pleased with that. So that bodes well for covering the rest of the model. But I think as I did there, I will do in 5cm sections, a bit like it says for the tissue. I'll start at the rear and work my way forwards, working between formers. But yep, battery hatch nicely covered. What I do need to do still for the battery hatch is put the magnets there to actually give it lock in place. But yeah, happy with how that looks. Good. This is a picture of the battery hatch with the aluminium foil. This is it when I've used the aura cover, which I think does look a lot neater. It's taken out any dips in it. This photo shows you the difference. Cut the center out of the cowling so the electric motor can fit through. Lightly sanded the back of the firewall, marking the center of where the motor should be. That looks pretty good. Marking on the motor mount so that I can put drill holes in the right place, drawn around it so that when I move it, it's easier to see. Just testing how the motor fits. Slightly low, so I will need to put a spacer in. There you can see I've got a black space for when the prop goes on. And there you get some decent coverage, but not too far, and it all looks nice and central. Now I'm going to fit the screws in. Using epoxy to stick the firewall to the main fuselage just to make sure it's nicely stuck. I found before that super glue doesn't hold it. All nicely fitted and tight. Firewall for the motor is now properly secured on. What I do need to do though is go around and shape it, shape the plywood piece to match balsa bulkhead, because that is more in line with the actual shape of the plastic cowl. Oops, sorry, so I shall do that, and also what I may do is cut the notches as well so that the stringers can have a nice move through, especially on the bottom. Obviously not so important on the top because that's where the battery hatch goes. When I screw the motor mount and the motor to this piece, and what I'll be doing is adding a couple of washers here, which will give it that slight down and right cant for the motor, which will hopefully offset any of the torque. So fingers crossed that will make the difference. I had to re-drill the holes after I put the epoxy in. It's easier for the screws. Put the notches in for the stringers. Spray painted it green because once the cowling's on I won't be able to get in there. While I did it, I also did the inside of the undercarriage. Okay, so we've got the undercarriage completed. Spray painted the green. It's Vauxhall leaf green if anyone was interested. Secured the wheels, both nice and free moving. And what I've decided to do is move on to the battery hatch and make it a little bit more secure. So following the instructions, I've fitted the front stringers on. This is the largest battery that I could use for my setup. That's what it is if anybody's interested. And what I'm going to do obviously is insert it into this first rib section. But what I want to do is probably build a base about here to stop the battery dropping through and puncturing the foil underneath. And then I'll probably put something inside the formers as well to make it more of a secure hatch, obviously leaving space for the wires to go through from the ESC through to the receiver that will fit in between here somewhere. So I shall get on with building the hatch, internal hatch, sorry. So to help with the battery, not damaging the aura cover, I've put some balsa strips in. I've screwed the motor mount in, but those screws come out too far, so I've trimmed them. Still, they don't want it rubbing, so I've stuck some bolts on the top so it doesn't rub the battery and damage it. Just making sure the ESC fits in, which it does. Drawing the receiver onto a base. Now you can see how it's all going to fit through the fuselage. Doesn't look too bad with the servos. We're getting on with the electrics, and as I've said in previous videos, what you want to do before you start building them all into the fuselage, make sure they work. So throttle, yep, rudder, elevator, then ailerons. Also top tip when you're looking at these, make sure you get them so that they go the right way, so when you do the ailerons they move opposite directions. So I know I either need to put the wires both facing the same way basically. There we go, that all works nicely. Just now need to start fitting the rest of the electronics in properly. Okay, to get the servo wire from this position to the center and then up into the fuselage, need an extension. It's probably only 3 or 4 centimeters short, but these are the shortest extensions I've got. And my soldering isn't the best, so just to be safe, I will use the longer extensions. The good thing is there's plenty of space underneath and within the model that I can just roll them up and tidy it up once it's in there. So what I'm going to do is fit the servo in. Having checked it, the space isn't quite big enough. As you can see, it's a bit too snug. So what I'm going to do is cut a slot into this rib, slide the aileron in up to that point where the arm is, and then just strengthen it, and that'll be a nice central position pretty much if I can do it one-handed. Be like that, so pretty much down the center, which will work fine. So cutting those in, then routing the wires so they both come out in the center, either side of the central rib, just for ease, because that's how I've separated it out of the receiver. Here you can see I cut a slot into the rib to glue the servos in, pretty flat with the bottom of the rib, and they just need to work out where the wire goes. Done the same on both sides, made sure they go in the right direction, stuck in a bit of a stringer there to help reinforce it a bit more for the glue to hold on to, and that's how the wires will follow through. These extensions are way too long. There's going to be lots of surplus wire, so what I'm going to try and do is use this harness, connect it, and then obviously thread it through the wing, then plug that into the receiver. See how easy that is, but it should be a bit neater. The next few photos show you how I've passed the wires through the wing ribs, folded it through with the extension, glued it through, and also cut a slot in there so it fits neater on the fuselage, as you can see here. Rather than wait till the airplane's covered, I've decided to create the underside of the fuselage under the wing, so creating the templates like I did the battery hatch, and then just building it up slowly with the formers, and then putting the stringers in, trying to keep it pinned in place to keep it as straight as possible. Started from the top and worked my way around. Once it's nice and secure, I can now add in the side ones. Had to pin it down because it was twisting it slightly, but there you go, I can pretty much finished it. And then I decided after this to add in the base stringers just to make sure that it sits nice and flat, as you can see here. So cut those in, and then I'll be able to cover that separately before I then fit it under the wing. So I hope you found that really useful, and we'll see you in the next video.